Māori worldview is based on ecology, and that ecologists can really connect to Indigenous ways of being, and that maybe the value add that Indigenous cultures have is one, the connection over time to the particular place, knowing it intimately, knowing things that happen there, and also growing the kinship with it as you would a family member that you knew, or from your whānau, you grow that over time, and someone else can come and meet that same person and they might notice things, but they don't have that deep connection that gets to see the unseen things, the things that lie under the surface. So there's that historical connection, but there's also a wider aspect, the spiritual part of Indigenous culture that's really hard to put a finger on in terms of legislation and practice, and the way of knowing things. That doesn't involve just observing with your eyes and your ears and our physical senses, but also our puku. We have names for all of these things. Our puku and understanding the spirit world just as well as an ecologist might know the different realms of habitat. In the old world with Māori, it wasn't just the spirit, there was lots of different aspects of it, and we were supported in understanding that, and that's not as present anymore. It was really hard to put into legislation and things like that. So in terms of kaupapa Māori principles, to me a huge part of that is two things: the inclusion of people and the importance of people, and also the inclusion of wairua, also things that are unknown by science as yet. And they have a huge part to play, I believe, in ecological restoration. I feel like the land is hungry for that, for people to come together despite all their differences, because our ngāhere shows us, all the trees are not the same, but they can all live together, finding their place. It's the same. That the land actually speaks to us and is really, really hungry for us to get over our differences and find ways to heal together, heal the whenua and heal our own mamae, our own story.
Hi, Mike Devonshire, Chair of the Board of Trustees for Te Park Trust. This whenua is a sacred place, probably the iconic landmass within the wider Hawke's Bay district, and of utmost cultural significance to virtually anyone that you could ask, whether it be in Hawke's Bay or throughout New Zealand. We are very fortunate to be the kaitiaki of this sacred place, the taonga. We take it very seriously, our role in protection, and fundamental to that role is an understanding of how we can sustain what we have here. So the pressures on the park and the surrounding areas are intensifying. We're facing many challenges from an ecological and societal point of view. So what's critical to us is engaging strategically around sustainability and how we can infuse that into our planning. We've taken a 100-year vision and systematically starting to address how we can be, forward-thinking, but still relevant and still satisfying that demand. To a large extent, that involves an engagement with key members and groups in the community, primarily school children and educators, around principles of sustainability and evidencing them in what we do within the park.
Hello, I'm Emma Buttle and I'm manager of Te Park Trust. I've been working for the park for close on 4 years now. I feel very privileged to be in this role and part of the development of this wonderful community asset. So Te Park Trust was very, very fortunate in that we were granted $600,000 plus GST from Te Uru Rakau, Forestry New Zealand, for a substantial planting project of 59,000 native trees to take place over a 3 to 4 year period. This was just a wonderful addition and contribution to the park, and it's made a huge difference in our planting program and our aspirations for the park. So we're very grateful to Forestry New Zealand to enable us to do this. The plantings are taking place over 2 areas. We have one area which is a new block which we recently acquired through a community fundraising campaign in 2019. That's 8 hectares of land, and also another 4 hectares of land within the existing area of the park that is a new area that was recently felled of ageing pines that were about 85 years old. So that area looks quite different to how it used to, but we're anticipating that in 10, 15, 20 years time it's going to look magnificent. We've got a subcommittee who administer the project, composed of experts, people who've been volunteering and working in the park for a number of years and really do know their flora and fauna, so we're very grateful to those volunteers and can't wait to see what it looks like in 10 years' time.
I'm Troy Duncan. I'm the representative for the QEII National Trust for the Hawke's Bay area. So the Queen Elizabeth II National Trust, or QEII as it's commonly known, was established in 1977 as a charitable trust by an Act of Parliament to help protect and maintain open space values in New Zealand, predominantly natural, native open space values. In this project, which is inside the covenant over the park, I've been involved with the committee who's helped organise the, first of all, the harvest of the forest, and secondly the revegetation in natives of the 8 hectares plus another 7 hectares on another block of land adjacent to the park that's recently been added.
This is an area, it's called Te Kahika, and it's the new land that was purchased by the community a couple of years ago. And last year this land opened and a lot of the pine forest was removed to allow for native plantings. And as part of that, the Trust Board decided we wanted to start a school program, something that would allow the community to get involved. And so we started the Schools for Trees program. We invited schools all over Hawke's Bay to participate, and we landed with the 5 closest schools to the peak. And those schools adopted little bits of this area here to have for a lifetime. So from now on, these kids are going to be here annually, probably every 3 months, coming to mulch, weed release their plants, and just generally look after them. So one of the schools that we're working with has decided to adopt this area here and turn it into a QEII grove. Their year 6s every year, they gift QEII to the year 5, so the following year they can plant them during the winter planting season. And so they look after them, they raise them up, and then they bring them here, and they had raised a few, and so they've started this grove, and then they're going to come back year after year and look after them. And they were here actually on Friday looking after these plants, celebrating their year, and then they'll pass on the seedlings to their year 5s. So we have a group of young kids. They're William Pike kids. So the William Pike program is a community service program that allows kids to do community service in the area. And we have public planting days, and on those days we get a lot of William Pike kids. And so these are intermediate age kids, sometimes high school kids, and they're coming in with their families. They're working in the peak, they're doing mulching, they're doing planting, and they'll even come on days when we don't have public planting, and they're bringing their families, doing weeding, contacting us and saying, look, we're doing work in the park, we're enjoying what we're doing here, and they're getting more community service out of those experiences. We have a pretty good volunteer base, and our volunteers are made up of not just people who are coming to plant trees, but people who are building tracks, and we might have mountain biking groups, paragliders, walkers. So the recreational people are coming to give back. I mean, they're stakeholders because they're in here all the time recreating, but they care a lot, and so they have their own programs. We've got Friends of Te Park, which is run by Mike Lusk. They've been doing this for over 20 years. They're an amazing volunteer group. They've done the plantings up at the main car park. They restored the native Daphne, Familia Mimosa, which is native to Te Peak. There's been a lot of groups really passionate, putting their energy in to make some of those changes. So I feel like it's a place that's just so special to the community, that you have a lot of stakeholders, because you have all these different things that we're talking about. You have the volunteer groups, but you have the counselors coming in, you have these school groups coming in, but also their families, their parents, their siblings, and you're going to get that year after year, is like more kids coming in, more families coming in. So I think it's supported by an entire community of people that are just living in this area and they're looking at the peak. Yeah.
I'm Bruno Chambers. I was chairman of the park board for 17 years and have remained as a trustee on the trust. This trust was formed in 1927 by my forebears, my great-grandfather and his two brothers, to commemorate their founding pioneer father, John Chambers, who came here in 1852 initially and leased some land from the Māoris at that stage and later acquired it from the government in 1862. It was deemed essential to preserve this area for the public of Hawke's Bay, and hence a trust was set up to put that in place and prevent certain development that would have compromised the landscape integrity and been completely inappropriate. And this is now an incredibly widely used park by the people of Hawke's Bay and visitors from abroad and other places in New Zealand. And it's a remarkable place. It's got all sorts of different crannies and nooks and crannies, and people love it, and they all kind of have a sense of ownership of it. So it's been a real credit to my forebears to have set this up and for it to be as successful as a park as it is today. This was land that was largely cloaked in bracken fern, a low-lying pig fern that was relatively easy for the settlers to clear and turn into grassland. So they would burn it off and then sow grass seed and subsequently graze it hard and try to get the grasses established over the pig fern. There were pockets of bush sort of established in the lower valleys and so on that were quite, well, they were still quite intact, but those have diminished over the last couple of hundred years of Pākehā, since the Pākehā arrival. So the goal is to recreate something of the forest of yesterday, and of course that doesn't happen overnight. These forests were thousands of years old, and the trees in them are sometimes 500-600 years old, so it will take a while, but it's very encouraging to see the start. The challenges here, of course, are the climate and lack of rainfall, and we've come in on the back of, well, we've had one very severe drought since the first planting, and we've had another, and that was following on a pretty severe drought from the year before. So the water retention in the ground is at an all-time low, and we need some decent rains to really help kick things along, and hopefully we'll get them with a better year this year.
This is a whole new area that was purchased from the previous landowner. It had been grazed, and it was actually, all this area was in pine trees when I first got involved in the park. Well, they were felled and they weren't replanted, but the seedlings were never dealt with, so it ended up being full of seedling pines and some other exotic trees that weren't appropriate. But a really good public fundraising bought this block of land, and it's not under the QEII covenant as the rest of the park is, but it's still an integral part of the park, and it's very popular. And once all the old pine trees were cleaned out, you're starting from bare ground, and so we've got an awful lot of mulch. We've got pretty well no slash, fairly easy planting terrain, and so this has been a good place for volunteer planting, and quite a lot. I don't know how many thousands of trees have gone in here, but there's scope for a lot more, and it's a damper area than further up in the park, so the trees seem to do better here. Once the bare land was there, we knew there would be really vigorous growth, but it was largely good growth because there was a good grass cover, and a lot of weeds don't compete very well with grass, so in a sense grass is your friend here. So there was some spot spraying done. We had vast quantities of mulch. The only problem we had with the mulch is the mulch tended to be down the bottom of the hill, and the plants tended to be up the slope, and carting mulch around is something that amateurs can only do for a couple of hours So mulching, we had the mulch and we had the plants that needed mulch, but marrying the two has been a bit tricky. Most of the planting's been done by pros, and because they can plant 1,000 trees a day. Well, to get a volunteer planting 100 trees a day, you're doing pretty well, and the smaller they are, the less you can expect them to do. So the school kids will plant 6 or 8 or 10 trees and have a couple of hours, and then they want to go and do something else, and that's fine. But volunteers are really useful, and they buy into the scheme. But if you want to plant volume, you've got to get the pros, and you've got to give them the right trees to plant, and you've got to be able to source the plants, of course, which hasn't been easy because there's so many planting native trees that even in a place like this, Murray Taylor, for example, has grown 120,000 trees this year, and I think she's going to try and grow 200,000 next year, and that probably will not cope with the demand. The first plants you plant are the most important ones because they are the ones that are going to protect the next type of plant, which will be the trees that grow a bit bigger and need a bit of shade to get started. And so you've really got to follow natural processes if you want to get good results. Other sorts of planting might look good for the first year or two, but I suspect that if you try to follow natural process, in 5 years and 10 years you will have a better result. And so you've got to accept that it's a slow business, and you can't be impatient about it, or you lose a lot of trees, you lose a lot of enthusiasm with your volunteers. The people who volunteer for a job like this, they want to see results, and as we had with the tawtara on a more exposed area on the flat, there were a lot of dead tawtara there. For people who might have planted those tawtara were looking and seeing dead tawtara, and that was not a good look. That was a genuine enough mistake, and they were good trees. They appeared to be good, healthy trees when they went in. They just didn't survive the first summer. And of course, the other thing we have in a place like this, you simply cannot water. The Friends of Tomato Park tried to water when we first started planting a relatively small number of trees, and it really proved to us that you're daft if you try and plant trees in inaccessible places that need water, because you won't get enough water to them. It only takes a couple of hot days with a nor'wester and all the water's sucked out of the soil and the tree, and you lose your trees. So you've got to be pretty sensible with your plant selection, and you can really only know that by looking at what is doing well already in the park, and ideally eco-sourcing if you can, and trying to follow the natural progression so that you will plant, say, Manuka, Kānaka, which are primary colonisers, and you get help from things like poroporo, and the grass is helpful in a sense too. Once you've got your primary colonisers away, then you can then start planting other things that can cope with dry conditions but can't cope with high winds and can't cope with full sun. Oh, I think the future for the park is great. It's always going to be quite a busy park. It's never going to be a sort of pristine forest. It's going to have tracks all over it. But there's always going to have to be a lot of weed control, management of plantings, predator control, people control. But I've seen the park advance dramatically in the time we've been coming up here and using it, and it's a very precious place to a lot of people. Even if they don't know anything about the biodiversity, they just love the park, and maybe as the next generation comes on, they'll love the park, but they'll perhaps understand it a little bit better too.
So Rongoā is a term that speaks about traditional Māori medicine. It's kind of an umbrella term that has different modalities underneath it, different miri and practices on the tinana in regards to the Wairoan spirit, and there's also an aspect of that which is Rongoā, so medicines and practices relating to our native trees. The way that I've been taught Rongoā from Pa McGowan, who was taught by the people from the Whanganui River alongside others, was that the role of the plants isn't to heal us, that they're not as important as that actually the roles of the plants are to heal the land, and it's by us seeing what they do, seeing how they operate, that we're able to utilise them for our own healing. So manuka, for instance, its seeds are carried by the wind and lands on bare soil, and from there it's able to heal it, because the ground isn't supposed to be bare and dry and dirt. It's supposed to have life in it and soil. And so through seeing that it has that effect on the soil, we can also see how it can treat us with wounds. Externally, when we've got grazes and things like that, help to heal it up. So a point about Rongoā is that it's a lot of people, Rongoā and Mātauranga Māori, a lot of people focus on the content of what's known, that this tree does this and this tree was used for that, but actually it's also the way of coming to know that, and also the way of going about living and learning and using, and then also the way of sharing that knowledge. So it's more of a way of being than just what you know. In Hawke's Bay we have a lot of productive farmland and things like that, but we don't have a lot of native bush left. We actually have little pockets of old remnants that are quite far from each other, so quite disconnected. And in terms of learning Rongoā Māori medicine pertaining to our trees or our rako, it's quite hard to learn here, because you want to get familiar with the trees and get to know them, and you have to travel quite a way to do that. And so in Hawke's Bay, because we have this significant place that we all feel connected to, whether we're Māori, Pākehā, no matter which hapu we're from, it seems like a really fitting place to have a resource where people can come and learn their native trees and learn a bit about their traditional uses pertaining to medicine, and also other uses of our native trees. So what we're trying to do down there is eventually develop a standard ngahere specifically for teaching Rongoā, for showing how to harvest and introducing people to trees, but also introducing them to ways in which they can continue their learning. A lot of it is focused on us. So the way that we look at it is, what does this plant do for me? What can I use that plant for? And that misses the point for me for Rongoā and for Mātauranga and all the teachings from the old people. It's more about understanding the place of everything, the balance of everything, and how to keep wellness with their understanding, how we can play a part to help maintain balance. So this project, because it's ongoing, and the people that are coming are willing to do work and they're willing to commit to it over a period of time. They are here voluntarily, so no one's forcing them, no one's paying them. That to me is huge in achieving the spirit of learning that we require, that we want to. So that we can all not just remember what tree does what, but actually get an understanding of how nature works, and understand how to heal it, understand how to utilize all of our senses, but also how to all get along. Because we have a lot of different people who are interested. We have Māori, we have Pākehā, so for Aotearoa we're endeavouring to become the bilingual country in the first instance that we stated we would be way back in the day. And healing isn't always pretty. It's not just balms and lotions and wairako. It involves us trying to understand the other person, empathising, having compassion, paying attention to each other and also to the land. So for me this project is one that I'm really excited to be able to really do justice to the old people and what they're trying to share. So in the Rongoā garden at the moment we have poroporo and karamu, which are growing there and have been growing there already. So they are two rongoā plants, puro used for treating eczema, and also karamu is used to treat the blood as a blood cleanser and to break down blood sugars, so really good for diabetics. And them being there tells us something about the land as well, which is really important, because you can plant a rongoā garden and just think, oh, these are 10 plants that we use for rongoā and we're just going to pop them in, and then in 15 years we'll come back and we'll be able to harvest from that. But it's missing the point a lot, because we're using this process, it's a process to help us to understand how the land heals itself. So what grows naturally there is really important to us. So what did used to grow there and what is currently growing there without us having a hand in it. And then from watching, which is one of the old people's ways, from observing whakapapa, so what used to happen there, also a sense of the Māori of the place, because activities that have happened in a place, the feeling stays there, it stays in the space, and it seeps down into the land. For instance, if there were any fighting and bloodshed, that goes down into the land. So it's really important to know the stuff before you can know what it's able to be used for. So throughout Hawke's Bay we have an issue with erosion, and we recognise that we need to plant trees, plant a lot straight away as soon as possible. But the soil is really dry, quite compact, and we struggle with droughts over the summer. From my understanding of rongoā, of how the body heals and works, and also how the land works, so our stomach is like the soil and has a balance of microorganisms that help to keep us well in general, and the soil is the same for Papatūānuku. And at the moment, with all the chemical treatments and things like this, the way that we've been utilising the land, there's not a lot of life in there, not a lot of Māori. And so for me that's an indirect way that I've learnt through rongoā that we should be applying our knowledge to the whenua. And so with our rongoā area we're focusing a lot on trying to bring that life back into the soil and enhance the water retaining capacity, so the water that we do get doesn't just slide off, so that it soaks in. And the way that we've been doing that is restoring connection. We're quite isolated here from all the old remnants, and so we do things like bringing stones, which we believe have Māori life force, from our travels, and slowly over time building our stream bed to shape it. And also when we go to the bush we collect bags of forest stuff, and then we come here and we mix it into our mulch to connect this place with those existing stands of ngāhere, and hoping that the organisms and things that are in there can establish here, as well as applying organic fish fertiliser, a liquid fertiliser, and mycorrhizal fungi input to try and bring life into there, so that the soil is able to come to life and help our plants to survive these long harvests.